From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Michigan's constitution states that every 16 years, voters are asked if they want to hold a constitutional convention.
Also known as a convene. The process could see a rewrite of the entire state constitution.
And that 16 years, it's next year.
In an already huge 2026 election.
As a voter, you will have the power to decide whether or not you want to see a constitutional convention.
If voters say yes, a convention would be held. A document would be produced by convention delegates, and it would go back to voters to decide if they want to adopt it or stick with the current constitution.
It's all to say a really big deal.
And if we are being candid here, something you, Zoe, are rather obsessed with.
It's true. I think about it a lot, which is why I recently decided to turn to two folks also thinking a lot about it. Eric Lufer, he is president of Citizens Research Council, and Nancy Kaffer, editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press. Hello to you both.
Hi.
It's great to be here.
Okay, Eric, I want to start with you. A little birdie told me that this will actually be the third time that you have been around for the possibility of a constitutional convention.
Yes. It might be a sign of aging. It might be a sign of a time warp, but this is the third time I'm going through this process of looking at what's good and bad on our current constitution and thinking about why the voters might want to vote yes on such a question. This is not rewrite. This is to write a constitution. They're not bound by any part of the current document. They can do anything they want to write a constitution that's going to define the powers of the governor, the legislature, the judicial branch, local governments, universities, school system, our rights as citizens of the state of Michigan, and a lot of details in between.
Every single thing that is in the Michigan Constitution possibly up for grabs.
And things that aren't, that could be.
That could be added. Nancy, the question to voters automatically will be Proposal 1 because every 16 years, as part of the Michigan Constitution, this question is asked. Tell me what you first thought when you realized that the Constitutional Convention question would be on the ballot in 2026, a year when we already have an open gubernatorial race, a race for Secretary of State, Attorney General, an open U.S. Senate seat, the entire state House, the entire state Senate. I could go on.
I wanted to cry. I think I yelled at my empty office, "Are you freaking kidding me?" I was very unhappy. I was editing a guest column by contributing columnist John Lindstrom, genius political observer John Lindstrom, the publisher of Gongwer for a long time, a veteran journalist in our state. He included this detail in the column I was editing, and I wanted to cry. I thought, there's too much happening.
Eric, it's a lot that would happen.
Well, you listed the political offices, but at the same time, we're going to have potentially a number of proposed constitutional amendments that are really leaning into the idea that our system isn't working. And Mayor Duggan, of course, running as an independent. We were both up in Mackinac, and his whole stage speech was everything is broken and we need to do it different. And if he's going to do that for months, we're going to have sort of ingrained in us by the time we get to November 2026, the system's not working, let's try something different.
Nancy, I'm curious about your thoughts. In some respects, there's a sense that that's what happened in election 2024. Voters being frustrated at a system that they say isn't working.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think every time we've had a con question, it's gone down by a wide margin. But the wide margin is dwindling. So like in 1978, 77% of voters said no to a con. In 2010, it was 67%. That's still a pretty decisive vote. But I think we've had a pretty dramatic arc of change between 2010 and now in terms of people's satisfaction with government and their feeling that it is working for them. What is sort of ironic about this is that a con would seem to draw out all the things people are unhappy about with the state of government. Because if I thought that a con would be a bunch of Eric Lufer's really like thoughtful, contemplative people who understand policy and its nuances, sitting down to craft a great foundational document for the state of Michigan, that would be one thing. But what we're going to see if voters approve the CONCON, and even leading up to this, is every group that has an issue that they think should reshape Michigan society spending lots and lots of money and fighting bitterly to get it happening. I think there's times in the past when this could have potentially helped people feel more confident in government. I don't see this as a process, if voters were to approve it, that would have that result.
Eric, let's dig in. How would this actually work? Let's say Michiganders were to vote in favor of completely rewriting the state constitution. Yep. What does that process actually look like?
So they vote yes. Now we put into a process a primary election that would happen in February of 2027 and a special election that would happen in May of 2027. October 5th of 2027, the convention would convene in Lansing. The Constitution's very clear about that. It'll be up to the legislature between November 2026 and October 2027 to create an appropriation to fund these delegates, to fund staff, to fund meeting space, to fund computers and equipment and everything else that would go into such an effort. They convene in October, and the first process will be pick leader of the Constitutional Convention, to have sort of lieutenants shepherding the groups, to create committees and assign people to committees. And then they dig in, and they're going to hear from outside groups. They're going to hear people feel strongly about one thing or another, and they're free to write it any way they choose. Of course, you've got to come to a majority here, and part of the politics of this, November 2026 will be the midterm election. Does that carry over into early 2027? Michigan being a very purple state, who exactly gets elected?
So as a voter, how am I represented in the process? Who represents me?
The process is laid out so we choose one delegate from every House district and one delegate from every Senate district. So each of us will be represented by 2 Constitutional Convention delegates. Since the voters, not politicians, and the redistricted that happened in 2021 and 22, the process is much fairer now. It's a pretty even split. We see that in the House and Senate, the elections that have happened since then. So it's sort of, I look to you, Zoe, and Nancy, and Rick, and others that really dig into the politics, that like, how does this shake out? But it promises to be a pretty even split of the delegates, I think. And so there'll have to be a lot of coalition building and compromise happening for us to settle on what actually ends up in a proposed draft constitution.
And so we should note that delegates actually run as Democrats and Republicans.
They do, yes.
So Nancy, again, if voters were to vote to approve a constitutional convention, we would come out of a huge, enormous election in November of 26 when all of these offices are up for election into February, and votes for delegates.
So I think Eric is a real optimist. And if I believe that the Constitutional Convention would be staffed and guided by people like Eric, who are really thoughtful, just sober stewards of resources in the state, steeped in policy, really, really interested in the best and most fair and most workable systems of government, I think that that would be outstanding. But I think that in this type of process, I think that Eric's depiction of what happened might be a little too optimistic, that there would be negotiation and there would be this sort of collaborative process that leads to a document everyone can agree on. I mean, I'm foreseeing far more of just an absolute partisan knockdown, drag out fight. You see people just using this opportunity to get their wedge issue into our foundational document. And governing documents are a little bit of a weird thing. I've covered a couple of Detroit charter revision processes, one that actually passed and one that voters did not approve of. But, there's always kind of a temptation to chunk things into your governing document. But a governing document is sort of the outline for how things operate. It's sort of your terms of engagement. And it shouldn't deal with a lot of different specifics. That's what statutes and laws are for, is to deal with specific situations. It's, the governing document is supposed to be the framework. I'm also from Alabama, where they sort of consider amending the Constitution to be Like the second only to college football is the state sport. The Alabama Constitution is something like 9 million pages long. No, not 9 million, but maybe close.
The longest in the nation.
Because they amend it constantly. Yeah, 403,000 words compared to Michigan's at around 31,000 words. So this isn't a revision process. This is like, yes, starting from scratch. There's going to be a lot of temptation among people to try to really strongly shape Michigan in the interests that they want to see advance. And I just, at this particular point in our divisive politics, I don't see anything good coming out of that. So there's a little preview of the Free Press endorsement on Prop 1 next year.
That is Nancy Kaffer, editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press, and Eric Lufer, president of Citizens Research Council. So, Eric, let's get back to the idea of amending the Michigan Constitution, which we have seen happen about abortion rights, about redistricting, term limits even, versus the idea of rewriting the entire Constitution. Those things that I just named all could be up for revision. And then there's things that are actually in the Constitution, the 1963 Constitution, like the fact that we have a flat income tax. So we are talking about from social issues to economic issues at play here.
Yeah, so in the period since we adopted the 63 Constitution, we've amended it 45 times. And many of the issues that you covered have been added. There's been others that have been defeated. It's a fairly easy process to amend our state constitution. And the difference between creating a statute, initiating a statute, and amending the Constitution are so similar that a lot of times, why would you put something in statute when you could just put it in the Constitution and have it last forever? People go that route. So we've ended up in a lot of detail, not as crazy as Alabama's Constitution, but things like the Natural Resources Trust Fund, where they literally just picked up legislation and put it word for word into the Constitution and cluttered it up. And that's not to say anything about the good or bad of that issue. It's just it literally was legislation, and now we're putting it in the Constitution. And the bad part is if we decide this isn't working, now we have to amend the Constitution again instead of going through the legislative process. So sort of the difference, what I've been thinking a lot about, when you have a group that wants to amend the Constitution, you create a friends group, right? And you agree with each other. This is broken. We need to fix it, where you need to amend the Constitution. But you don't go talk to your opposition about what you're thinking, and you don't vet it with outside groups. It becomes just a very one-sided approach to an issue that may or may not be well-reasoned and may or may not be in conformance with other elements of a constitution, and often hasn't had the reason, like we have government to compromise, right? If we could all just get along, we wouldn't need government. But to create a constitution, create laws, creates the guardrails and the rules that we have to live by. So for one group to just think this is what we need to do differently and amend the Constitution is kind of a perverted system, a kind of a broken way of fixing our fundamental document. The good part, if it works right, if Nancy's wrong, is that when you rewrite the Constitution, you're putting people in a room and locking the door and telling them, we're not going to let you out until you find a way to figure this out. And compromise is built into that.
Not literally, though. Let's just be clear. It's not like the Pope.
We're going to wait for white smoke to know that we have a new Constitution. Yeah. But yeah, their job is to come up with a draft document. And there's no time limit built into it. Past conventions haven't taken that long to get it done, but there's no limit. So we're building in a process where compromise should take place.
Should, but the challenge is right now, I think one of the big problems in our politics is there's this lack of faith, not just in government, but in all traditional institutions. And there's this thing where we used to say you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. We don't feel that way anymore. We all have a set of facts that we like, that tell us what we want to hear about the world. But, there's this big, broad issue. And I guess I'm just not as hopeful about the idea of compromise.
So the other part of this, we've had sort of three phases of constitutional amendments. The first ones were sort of cleanup of the 63 some things they didn't quite get right. And then we got through the 70s and 80s. It was about tax revolt. We ended up with the Headley Amendment and school finance reform in 1994. But there were many other efforts that failed. And then more recently, it's been a lot of the social issues, the abortion and affirmative action and same-sex marriage and that type of thing. But there's a lot of constitutional issues that those of us that pay attention to, like things just aren't working right, and it goes back to the Constitution, but they're not so high profile that we're ever going to get an amendment on those types of things. The fact that how we govern our universities, the State Board of Education, just this year we had the issue of whether the House had to finish off the process of enacting laws, submitting them to the governor.
Delivering 9 bills to the governor.
There's a lot of minutia that just don't rise to the level where anybody would put the money or the effort into campaigning for an amendment. So again, this constitutional convention process is, let's take a wholesale look at it. And some of these issues that are low profile but in need of attention will rise to the level that maybe we get some change where change is necessary.
I mean, and I'd agree with Eric. There are certainly things about our framework that don't make sense. The way that our candidates for the state Supreme Court or even for AG are nominated, they're nominated by political parties. There's not a primary. I mean, particularly for Supreme Court justices, as judges are supposed to be nonpartisan, they're supposed to be impartial, but then they're directly nominated by political parties. That's one reason why in 2010, the Free Press did support a constitutional convention. And that was a primary reason because of the way the Supreme Court was constructed. But again, I don't know that the folks who were here in 2010, I was not, would make that same decision today. And I don't know whether it's worth straightening out some issues like university boards or judicial nominations. I don't know if that justifies the harm that could be done. Again, like I said, if it was a convention full of Eric Loofers, it would be one thing. But with the challenges in restricting campaign finance contributions Eric was alluding to, it's just, it seems like it's really opening Pandora's box here, or rather opening Pandora's box, shaking out the inside and then putting I don't know what into it.
Zoe, I want to add, Citizens Research Council is paying a lot of attention to this. So starting early in 2026, we're going to have a series of reports that talk about the process, the issues, many of the things we've covered here, and then looks at each of the articles of the Constitution to lay out some of these issues so the voters can be very informed when they get to November of next year.
Eric Loofer, president of the Citizens Research Council, and Nancy Kaffer, editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press. Thank you both. I know this is going to be the first of many conversations that we have about the possibility of a constitutional convention in Michigan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The first of many conversations.
But what do you think about the possibility of a constitutional convention? For it? Against? Or just have more questions? Drop us an email, politics@michiganpublic.org. Again, it is politics@michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.